Maddy Glab here with Ravens team reporter Cassie Calvert. Cassie, thank you so much for being on here today and helping break down this matchup between the Bills and the Ravens. A very interesting matchup. I mean, we saw each other last season. It didn't go in the Bills' favor. It was a unique game for both teams. I was looking back at the stats, and both teams converted under 30% of their third downs. The total yardage in that game was like 466 total yards for both teams combined. So we didn't see either team move the ball that much. And I look at these teams now, and their offenses look different. So it'll be interesting to see who moves the ball more if both teams are able to move the ball more against two talented defenses here in the divisional round. But first of all, the Ravens, they have the best rushing offense in the NFL. Duh, pretty much anybody could say that. But the second best scoring defense in the NFL, which has carried over from last season, the stout defense that the Ravens had. But you guys have finished the regular season riding a hot streak, much like the Buffalo Bills. You have a 6-game win streak going on. So how has this team been able to finish the regular season and into the playoffs so hot?
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned that matchup from last year, because the Ravens talked this week about how the Bills defense was the hardest thing that they saw all last season. And it was a season where they played some tough opponents. So you're looking at the Chiefs game, things like that, and they really nailed that Bills game. But yeah, looking at this year, like you mentioned, kind of turned around mid-season for the Ravens. They started off pretty hot, hit a little bit of a rough patch there, and that's kind of when you saw a lot of the COVID stuff flare up for the Ravens. They missed a lot of players, lost a few games there down the stretch, but when Lamar Jackson came back from his COVID absence, he's just really struck a nerve ever since he got back. He's been on a hot streak. I think a lot of the players have talked about how he's just come back with like a joy. You know, he's been rejuvenated down the stretch here. Just, you know, it's one of those things that when you have something and you can't have it, you know, you really realize how much you love it when you can't have it. And that's definitely been the case for the Ravens as they all kind of came back from their COVID absences. And like you mentioned, the run game has just been a huge part of that down the stretch. There was a little bit of figuring out the offensive line early. Ronnie Stanley, who's just been a stalwart on this Ravens offensive line, went down earlier in the season. And so there's kind of been a little bit patchwork as the season goes on, shuffling guys in and out. There's been some snapping issues with the centers. So figuring out the offensive line was kind of key. It's still a little bit of a rotation there. So you'll see a few guys shuffle in that last spot, but the offensive line has really come on strong down the stretch, and that's just really attributed to this huge run game that we see from the Ravens these past 2 seasons. It was a franchise record in the last regular season game with 404 rushing yards, and overall the entire season they finished only second in franchise history just to last year. You know,
Wow.
This run game has just been really, really dominant, and it's something that when you have a backfield that has Lamar Jackson, Gus Edwards, and J.K. Dobbins, who all finished the season over 700 yards, only the third team in NFL history to do that, it's definitely something special to behold.
Yeah, the Ravens are one of few, if not the only team in the NFL who's really not gone towards the passing way of the NFL and have said, look, we have a quarterback here in Lamar Jackson who knows how to run the ball. We're going to build it around him, and we're going to also put some awesome runners next to him to complement the way that he's able to run the ball. But compared to last season, how do you think this team has changed from last season to this season? I mean, J.K. Dobbins, of course, is an addition. You lose a tight end. The tight end isn't as used as much as it was, and I'm looking at the frequency and number of tight ends in the offense this season, and you look at your defense, and you guys added some good players up front on defensive end, much like the Buffalo Bills have. So how do you compare last season to this season and how this team has been able to change?
Definitely. Our offensive coordinator, Greg Roman, talked about that this week. And you do have a lot of the same key pieces there in offense. Like you mentioned, they did lose Nick Boyle at tight end, and he's a huge part of the blocking game as well. So that's been a bit of adjustment. Fullback Patrick Ricard has filled in pretty nicely there. He's picked up a lot of Nick Boyle's load, but Greg Roman just talked about this week, this team has just kind of matured, you know, and last season, it was really a boat race where they were just blowing teams out of the water week in and week out. And there wasn't a lot of adversity down the stretch. Finished the season 14-2 going into the playoffs. And like maybe besides the Bills game, not a ton of challenges there, especially towards the latter half of that season. And So you hit some adversity when you hit the playoffs, and he just kind of felt like the team wasn't really ready to handle that yet. But this year they are, like we talked about before, just going through all of the absences with COVID. The Ravens had one of the worst outbreaks, and having to deal with having so many missing pieces, just the maturity of having guys having experienced the playoff atmosphere before. It's a really young team, especially on offense. You have such a young quarterback like Josh Allen. And so when you don't have that playoff experience, it's obviously an adjustment. And just being able to kind of battle through those things, it's inevitable in a football season. He talked about that, like, a few things aren't going to go your way. So what happens when that does happen, and how do you respond to that? And that's just something that this team is more capable of doing. We've seen them last week playing the Titans, coming back from 10 points down. And, in the past, it was always this narrative of Lamar Jackson can't come back from a deficit. And he's proven that wrong, and I think that took a year under his belt, getting some of that experience, figuring out how to make those game time adjustments. And like you mentioned, some defensive adjustments as well in the offseason. The Ravens saw last year, what Derrick Henry was able to do to them in the playoffs. And part of the offseason moves were to combat that, and it's funny that they did end up seeing him again in the playoffs. And this year you add Calais Campbell and Derek Wolfe, and they're able to stop him. They held him to his lowest run total of the season with just 40 rushing yards. So they really made those moves in the offseason to prepare for what their deficits were last year. And we've seen that really pay off down the stretch.
Yeah, the Buffalo Bills have definitely done that as well. They wanted to increase their point total and give Josh Allen more guys who could catch passes from him. And we saw that with the addition of Stephon Diggs. They go and draft a wide receiver like Gabriel Davis, and they increase their points per game average by 11.7, which is more than any other team in the NFL. So it's really been incredible to watch the Bills get better in that facet. But when you look at Lamar Jackson and how he's grown from last season, and since he's gotten into the NFL, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson coming into the league at the same time, these are two quarterbacks who had a lot of doubts about them, and who their teams were looked at when they drafted these quarterbacks as, is this going to pan out for this team? You just spent a high draft pick, and you're riding the franchise on this quarterback. And we've seen how it's paid off for both teams. And Lamar Jackson can finally say he's won a playoff game. That narrative has been burned and put down to the ground for him, thankfully, being able to beat the Titans as we saw last week, and do it with his legs and rush for over 100 rushing yards. But when you look at his game, how has he grown in his game this season?
Yeah, I think the two of them are really just going to be fun to watch, in this AFC going forward, having such two. Really, you look at all the AFC teams in the playoffs, all these young quarterbacks. I'm personally really excited to get to watch them for years to come. I think it's going to be a lot of fun, and I feel like this is going to be the first, big chapter of that journey. But yeah, we talked about it a little bit before, like coming back from COVID, Lamar has just really flipped a switch. It's kind of like you mentioned, like, he's just been more relaxed, more aggressive, and being willing to, not feel like he needs to force things that aren't there. I think part of it is wanting to prove that he does have the arm, and make those connect on those deep balls. But what makes him so special is his ability to do so much. And I think that now that he's come back, he's just really, gotten back into having fun out there, relaxing, being dialed in. His teammates have talked about that a lot. It's just been a different energy. He's always a fun, energetic guy, great to be around, but just coming back, it's really been on another level for him. And just, he talked about it this week too, like he was just more conservative at the beginning of the season, just kind of figuring things out. When his first read's not there, second read isn't there. Now he's taking advantage of what defenses are giving him. And you saw that in the Titans game. Greg Roman talked about how they had seen some of those coverages before, and how if they saw certain things, they wanted Lamar to just take off and do what he does. And like, we saw that on that incredible touchdown run he had last week. So, and just like over the last 5 games, the regular season, once he did come back, the NFL best QBR and rushing for 430 yards for the last 5 games. It's incredible. When he's in his zone, he's such a special player to watch. And like you said, I think he really does enjoy kind of proving the haters wrong. It was a big thing for him to get that playoff win, and he's someone that's definitely fueled by that. But at the same time, he has bigger goals. He's always talks about the Super Bowl is the end goal, and nothing means anything if you don't win it. And so I think he's just really keyed in on that now. He's not letting that one playoff victory go to his head. There's definitely loftier goals in mind for him, for sure.
Yeah, you could definitely see that in the post-game interview that he did that. Just a playoff win wasn't enough for him, and it was about more than just him getting that monkey off of his back. It was about the team getting a win as a whole. But the defense is a defense that has been a top 5 unit, and like we already talked about, you add depth to the defensive line to be able to help set the edge a little bit better against the big running backs that you've faced in the past and have in your division. But being a top 2 scoring defense, allowing only 18.9 points per game is such a low number, allowing only 221 passing yards a game, which ranks 6th. You guys lead the NFL in forced fumbles, which is incredible to see that the secondary really leads the unit in that. You think forced fumbles and you think defensive line, but for you guys, it's the corners who have been able to force those fumbles. So how have they been able to remain so stout all season long?
Yeah, I think it's a huge testament to Wink Martindale, the Ravens defensive coordinator. He's such a player's coach, and they call him a wizard. He will blitz anyone and anything. He has a really positionless defense, which is really fun to watch. He has the ability to set up schemes according to his players' skill sets, you know, so he's not afraid to have a linebacker doing something you typically see a safety do. Like he really calls it his positionless defense. He's getting head coaching buzz for the same reason. It's just always a good defense under Wink Martindale. He loves the chess match of scheming up what against offenses are going to do. He talked a lot about Josh Allen this week and the challenges that he brings, but he's just a great coach and the players love playing for him. And that's a huge part of it as well. Runs a ton of different packages. So it's always something different. But you mentioned the forced fumbles, and really that's a testament to Marlon Humphrey. Like you talked about, it's hard to say he's underrated because he's now a 2-time Pro Bowler and last year was an All-Pro, but he really doesn't get quite the recognition that I feel like he deserves. He has 8 forced fumbles himself, which he's a cornerback, you know, like it's crazy. And that's a franchise record, obviously, and ties Peanut Tillman for an NFL record from the regular season. And he watches a ton of Peanut Tillman's film of the Peanut Punch, you know, and we call him Fruit Punch. So when you see the ball go toward Marlon Humphrey, that's always what you're looking for. It's always a risk. Even if the receiver makes the catch, you don't know for sure what's going to happen. His teammates talk all the time about how infectious his energy is, and he truly fits the mold of this like stereotypical Ravens defense, the play like a Raven mindset. He's just a fun guy too to be around. He has a great personality, and he's kind of the lifeblood of this defense. You know, you see the Calais Campbells, the Derek Wolves, the really tall, intimidating, you know, like ferocious looking guys, but like Marlon Humphrey, I think, is the unsung hero of this defense for sure.
Yeah, he definitely seems like it. And I'm sure our offensive coordinator and Brian Daboll is telling all of our wide receivers, hold on to the ball after you catch it. Your yards after catch, you need to be tucking and running just like a running back, if not more than a running back in this game, because if the corners get a hand on you, they're going to try and force it out. But looking at the roster as a whole, who are some more under the radar players that might be able to make a splash or pop off in this game against the Bills on Saturday night?
We talked about him a little bit earlier, and he's not super underrated at this point, but J.K. Dobbins, he had the most touchdowns by rookie in franchise history, 7 consecutive games with a rushing TD. But just as a rookie, he's not someone that's a big name yet, but he will be, certainly. He's clearly the future of this Ravens backfield. He's, you know, coming into this season, it was a crowded backfield. You had Mark Ingram, Gus Edwards, Justice Hill, and they all could be NFL starters. And so the Ravens draft this rookie in the second round, and everyone's kind of like, running back, we don't need a running back. And he's become that kind of lead dog there, and he's earned it. You know, he talks about when he came in the offseason, you know, coming from Ohio State, he always has played. He's never been in a situation where he had to, you know, wait his turn. And he said, like, that's going to be hard for me. He's like, I'm not a patient person, and not in like a bad way, but he just like, he wants to earn that role. And he certainly has, especially the second half of this season. He's just been on a crazy streak. And like I said, 7 consecutive games, the rushing touchdown for a rookie is incredible. We talked a little bit too about Pat Ricard really having to fill in when we lost Nick Boyle earlier in the season. Just a huge blocking tight end there, a pass catcher as well. And Pat Ricard is a fullback, and he's been out there catching some passes. I think he had like 3 passes for 26 yards against the Titans, and everyone's kind of like, who is this dude? He's 300 pounds out there. He's actually, the fun fact, the leading pass catcher for yards and total catches for a player who weighs over 300 pounds, which, you know,
Wow.
But he's super fun to watch. He's been a huge part of this run, the blocking game as well. He started out on the defensive line, used to be a two-way player, has now just kind of converted to offense full time, but he's definitely a fun one to watch for. And Pernell McPhee as well on the defensive side, outside linebacker. He's an OG. He was on the Ravens 2012 Super Bowl team. Bounced around a little bit, came back, but he really, really wants that second ring. And he probably had his best game of the year against the Titans last week. Coach Harbaugh talked this week about how he was just a physical force setting the edge, just dominating blocks out there. And yeah, so he's definitely one to look for. Well, it's tough to say he's underrated too, because he is around the league for so long, but he's really come on strong, especially when Calais was dealing with some injuries down the stretch this year. But yeah, Pernell is a fun one for sure.
All good information, all good things to know about. Thank you so much for taking the time to explain this Ravens team and why they have been able to win so many games this season, ending the regular season on a win streak, just like the Buffalo Bills have. There's a little bit of snow possibly in the forecast, some wind, so the Ravens will get a true taste of what Buffalo weather is like in January on Saturday night. I know Lamar said he doesn't want to see snow. He doesn't want to play in snow. But snow shouldn't bother him. The wind shouldn't bother him, because he's got the tools that you need if you're going to play in a cold weather, windy game like there might be in Buffalo on Saturday night. So it'll be a great matchup. Two good teams, two great teams from last season. It'll be really awesome to see how it all plays out for both of them.
Personally, I'm hoping for no snow, but the team will be prepared. Just selfishly, I would prefer there not to be snow.
You'll be nice and warm in the press box, so.
Yeah, let's hope so.
All right.
Thanks so
Cassie.
much for having me, Maddie.